Welcome back, everybody, to the Mullet River Sprint Track, home of Down Squad Racing. This is your host, Shannon BR, where today we are still trying to answer the question of what happens when you put a car that can fit one tiny little person up against a car that can fit mom, dad, 3 or 4 kids, and maybe grandma. This is Group 5 of Round 1, F1 versus Station Wagons. Let's meet our drivers, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go with the first team. It's Devers Racing. Nick Devers in the F1 car, Chicken George in that Porsche station wagon. Yes, that is legal. Next, it's Ben Rod Racing with Mrs. Brady in the station wagon and Boba Bent in that F1 car. It's beautiful. Grumpy Cloud here with Summer the Human in the F1 car, Napoleon the dog in the wagon. All these cars look beautiful today. Let's go check out the rules. Just remember, if there's a tie, it does go by team points. Top 3 advance, first place, your teammate advances with you. This is our 5th time going over the rules, so if you don't know them by now, they're right there, you can read. Here we go with F1 versus Station Wagons. Group 5, Round 1, Lap 1 grid is Chicken George and Summer the Human up front, Boba Bent and Mrs. Brady in the middle row, Napoleon the dog and Nick Devers in row 3. If you're starting that front row, you definitely got to try to score some points. If you're in that back row, just survive. There is Chicken George in the pole position, getting ready to lead him on down to the carousel. He leads him on down that Summer the Human right next to him. Through the hang 10 corner they go through Phil Collins, and that is Chicken George taking lap 1 with Summer the Human right behind him. I'm not sure everybody finished. Let's take a look here at the replay. We do not have a starting camera for this, so right now we're just going to have to go with what we have. Chicken George gets that hole shot, but you look in the back of the pack, Mrs. Brady gets off the track, flips and slides on her side, will eventually go completely upside down. You can see here in the Phil Collins corner, almost off the track. Everybody gets by and everybody else finishes. Your finishing order is Chicken George, Summer the Human, Boba Bent, that's Napoleon the dog, I almost said Lily the dog, and that is Nick Devers coming in 5th. Let's go ahead to lap 2 grid. Summer the Human and Mrs. Brady will be in that front row. Look at Chicken George with the early lead. Right behind him is Summer the Human. Let's see if Boba Bent and Napoleon the dog can do something from that back row. Here's lap 2. Summer the Human takes him on down, gets a nice lead. Chicken George right behind him, gets past Mrs. Brady through the Phil Collins corner. Everyone seems to go fast. I think we're missing somebody. And there is Boba Bent coming in late. Summer gets a great start with George right behind. That's Mrs. Brady getting passed by George. Summer takes the pole. They head down to the hard left. Mrs. Brady challenges for 2nd place going through Phil Collins. Just can't get it. George takes that 2nd place, and Boba just sliding through with one wheel off the track. Barely gets back on. I think he'll be just happy to finish and get the point. That's Summer, George, Mrs. Brady, Nick Devers. That's Napoleon the dog, and then Boba. Let's check out the lap 3 grid. That is Mrs. Brady and Nick Devers will be in the front row. Both need some points. Summer the Human and Chicken George are your leaders right now with a 3-way tie for 3rd between Devers, Napoleon, and Boba. Mrs. Brady is in your pole position here, ready to take him on down. Nick Devers gets a great start right next to her. Nick grabs a hole shot. Someone went flying. Nick blocking all the way down, takes 1st. I'm not quite sure who got 2nd there. Let's take a look in the replay. That's Miss Brady in the pole, and she takes him down, and Nick just gets a great start next to her. And you can see Napoleon the dog just pushing Nick, trying to get him out in front. Summer the Human goes flying off the track down the hill. Nick decides to start blocking everybody going into the hang 10 corner and holds onto that block until he gets into champs, straightens it out, and takes 1st place. Your finishing order is, we're going to have to see who got 2nd here. If you watch here, it looks like Napoleon almost gets past Mrs. Brady, but doesn't. So that is Nick Devers, Mrs. Brady, Napoleon the dog, Chicken George, and Boba. One more look at it. Let's get on to the lap 4 grid. Nick Devers and Napoleon the dog are going to be in front. Chicken George is currently starting in 6th, is your leader with 14 points. There's a tie for 2nd between Summer and Nick's going to be on your pole. Summer's going to have to do some work from that back row. Nick takes him on down to the carousel, and that is Napoleon right behind him. Gaining some speed, Napoleon is just gone. We'll take the lap with Napoleon right behind him. Boba Bent gets third, and there is a pileup coming out of Champ's corner. Not sure what happened here. Let's take a look. That's going to be a triple DNF. Here's your replay. Nick gets a great push from Miss Brady, and then Sully Miss Brady just lays back. Napoleon slides into second from the outside. And that's where Mrs. Brady flips it in the hard left. 3 cars get caught behind her, and that's when Nick and Napoleon just take off. And you can see here, wow, Boba just doing a hang 10 through the Phil Collins corner and using it as a way to get by Mrs. Brady, where everybody just gets caught in the mosh. That's a triple DNF. It's going to shake up the points a little bit. Lap 5 grid, Napoleon the Dog and Boba Bent are in front. Your current leader is Nick Devers with a tie between Chicken George and Napoleon the Dog for second, and another tie with Boba Bent and Summer for third. Here is Napoleon taking him on down, Boba pressing, trying to get that whole shot. Napoleon goes on his side and somehow recovers. That is Boba Bent getting the lap with Chicken George in second. Chicken George started in fourth, finished second. Great lap for him. The cars are pretty much together going through the carousel. No real big action heading down to the hard left. Well, coming on to the hard left, that is when Chicken George tries to flip over Napoleon the Dog. Napoleon the Dog having nothing of it and surviving it, still finishing third. Your finishing order is Boba Bent, Chicken George, Napoleon the Dog, Nick Devers, Mrs. Brady, and then Summer. Heading on down to the last lap. This is the grid. Boba Bent and Chicken George will be in the front right now. The lead belongs to Nick Devers. Mrs. Brady is out of it. Summer needs a miracle, but everybody else has a shot. So here we go, lap 6. Boba Bent is in the pole position. Here is the start of lap 6. Boba takes him down. George challenging right away. There's Napoleon challenging for second. Gets it. Spins. George will take the lap. Napoleon just flipped over on his way to the finish line. Going through the carousel here, if you watch Chicken George, he's going to put Boba Bent's back wheel off the track. That's going to spin him around going down the hill. Napoleon sees the open door to try to go for second place. Meanwhile, towards the back, Nick Devers takes a dive right off the track and spins and somehow gets back on the track. Check this out. Talk about hanging 10 in the hang 10 corner. Gets back on and keeps rolling. In the meantime, Napoleon has a great chance to move on if he finishes second and just rolls it in the champ's corner. He does go on to finish the lap, but after a couple of guys pass him, let's see who passed him here. Your finishing order is George, Boba, Mrs. Brady, then Napoleon the Dog falling all the way back to fourth. And unfortunately for their team, the only one that got stuck behind Napoleon was Napoleon's teammate, Summer. Nick almost passes Summer, which is pretty amazing because he was off the track over in the hang 10 corner. Here's your finishing results. Chicken George with 25 points, Boba Bent with 22 points, a tie between Nick Devers and Napoleon the Dog. Napoleon Dog would have had it, but rolled in that last corner, leading to the tie, and the tiebreaker goes to Nick Devers because his team points. What a crazy finish. Mrs. Brady and Summer the Human going 14 and 15 points respectively, but what a heartbreaking finish for Napoleon. Devers Racing 46 points, Bent Rod Racing 37 points, Grumpy Cloud 35 points. Congrats to those moving on. That is Chicken George, Boba Bent, and Nick Devers. We're going to be back next week with Group 6. In the meantime, if you like what you see, head on over to redlinederby.com. Redlinederby.com has everything you need to know about diecast racing. We'll see you next week from the Mullet River Sprint Track. This is Shannon BR saying, I don't know, I don't really have a tagline yet. How about, you're all clear, kid, let's blow this thing and go home.